Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, back with another episode of Thrifty Tunes for y'all. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new version of an IEM that I've reviewed in the past. This here is the new Kinera Celest Wyvern Black Remaster Edition, the follow-up to the very popular Wyvern Black. This one is priced at $32 US. Like the Wyvern Black, the remastered version features absolutely gorgeous faceplates and is powered by a single dynamic driver. The original Wyvern was a favorite of many in all of its different forms. Is the remaster here a Godfather 2, or is it more Caddyshack 2? Well, let's find out. As usual, quick disclaimer before we get going. These were sent to me by Kinera Celest themselves for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Kinera for sending me these, and thank you all for your continued support. In terms of unboxing and packaging, the remaster is basically near identical to the original Wyvern Black. Only big differences here, in my opinion, are there's now a waifu on the box, and inside the box you also get a nice little waifu card that you can put on things and have for sitting places. Outside of that, though, everything else is the same. You get the IEMs, you get the cable, you get a set of sort of gray standard ear tips in small, medium, large. You also get, since this is the version with the boom mic, you get a boom mic that you can attach to the cable. It comes with two little wind socks that you can put on there to protect from wind noise and things. And that's it. For 30 bucks, this is fine. A lot of the competition has a similar level of accessories. But recently, some of the competition has been upping the game. They now come with cases, pouches, or premium ear tips. That's what I'm missing here. But overall, I would say this is standard for this price point. So for $32, I think it's fine. So I have the boom mic version here with me. And what that means is I have the boom mic version of the cable here. I will say, I do not think this cable is as nice as the standard version on the Wyvern remaster here. The standard cable is essentially identical to the original Wyvern Black cable, which was quite nice. This more, gamer-oriented cable does have some benefits. The main one is length. This cable is 1.5 meters in length as opposed to the standard 1.2 meters. And the other benefit here is the 2-pin connection here for the boom mic. That's where you attach the boom mic. The boom mic sounds like this.
Roy Rogers and Lem Bixby were drawn together almost as soon as they shook hands. Bixby was an easygoing man with a straightforward manner. His eyes were blue and honest, and his face was crinkled from many years of easy laughter. When Roy inquired about the land on which Dick Collins held an option, Bixby gave him the details without reservation. He had, he explained, suspected that the ground held oil, but had never felt inclined to investigate. His income was sufficient for his needs and simple luxuries, and he chose to enjoy what he had rather than assume the worry and responsibility accompanying acquisition of more money.
Which I think is pretty good, honestly. Boom mics tend to sound fairly nice, and this is no exception. What you do give up for much nicer mic quality and the longer cable is, well, overall look and feel. This is a 2-wire Tagliatelle type cable, and while it is better than KZ's usual offering, it's still not great. All the hardware is sort of featureless plastic, doesn't feel too amazing in the hands. The 3.5mm connector here is a standard right angle 3.5mm unit. The Y-split is very Spartan in design, no branding or chin slider or anything on there, which is sort of standard for something that has inline controls. They are branded. You get a play-pause button, and that's it. The 2-pin connectors here on the ears, on the ear hooks, are comfortable. There's no sort of discomfort that comes from this plastic. You do get molded right and left indicators there on the ear hooks. There is a bit of a seam that you can see on some of these, maybe a little bit of sprue hanging off there. It's not the highest quality cable in the world. I personally, again, would pick the standard cable over this boom mic cable. I think it just feels nicer in the hands, behaves better. This one does exhibit a bit of memory when you just sort of lay it on a table. While the extra length is super nice, personally, I would never use the extra length. So yeah, I would just go for the standard cable. It's much nicer. The construction, design, and overall build, I would say, is the biggest external difference between this and the original Wyvern Black. While these are also full resin shells, the shape is much more universal, and the nozzles are metal, which I personally think is a good upgrade. They feature similar filters to what the Wyvern Black had. Curiously, there is no front vent like there was on the Wyvern Black. I've seen the pictures online. They do have a bass bypass tube, and you can sort of see that there's these 2 vents here at the back. It worked for me. I had no driver flex, no pressure buildup issues with these, which was quite nice. These 2-pin connectors you can see is slightly recessed. Yeah, outside of those 2 vents, there's really no acoustic structures or designs on these shells here. With the metal nozzles, some people might think is a downgrade. They can come unglued, they can come off or whatever. In my experience, nozzles that come off from glue failure can just be glued back into place very easily, while resin nozzles that are cracked and broken are essentially broken forever. These should be just about as durable as any other resin IEMs at this price point, and I do like the metal nozzle. It makes it feel just a little bit more premium. So, while we know that the acoustic design on the inside is different thanks to that bass bypass tube, what else has changed? We'll go ahead and pull up the specs. The Remaster, like the original, is powered by a 10mm dynamic driver, but this is the 2.0 upgraded spec with a nano composite LCP diaphragm. It's a single dynamic. That means drivability is super easy, no amp or dongle needed for these. Not only are they extremely easy to push with basically anything with a headphone jack, but they also don't change sound with impedance, so there's no real worries when using these with a warmer or less premium source. The weight is up a little bit compared to the original Wyvern Black, but nothing that you would notice, in everyday wear. Extra 0.2 grams per side, not really super noticeable, at least in my opinion. The nozzles are roughly the same size at around 6mm their widest point, and overall I would say the specs here read like any other budget single DD IEM, and that, like I keep saying, is a good thing. Time for the cool wall. Right away, the Black Remaster here has big shoes to fill. I remember saying dollar for dollar, the original Wyvern Black I think has the best looking faceplates on the market. Those dragon scales with the whole black aesthetic just looked absolutely stunning. The Remaster here comes in 2 designs. There's the Tide version, which I'm going to pull up here for you, probably right here. And then this Moss version, which I think is the better looking of the 2 and is just incredible looking. It's like a mineral dragon wing or something going on. It's really, really cool. While I do prefer the shells on the original Wyvern Black, I think Kinera Celest have succeeded in recreating the same sort of ultra premium faceplate look that they did on the original Wyvern Black. And I still think these are an easy sub-zero IEM in terms of the cool wall. Faceplates is something that Kinera Celest has been doing rather well lately. They did fantastic with the Yaksha. I think all 3 colors of those were great. And both versions of these are also pretty cool, although I will say I do really, really prefer this Moss version to the sort of more boring Tide version, at least in my opinion. But is the Moss version the superior one? Let's find out by checking in with the Council of Ladies. So first we'll start off with which version they preferred, and we have a unanimous victory for the Moss version, which makes me feel really good about my personal preferences here. As far as if these are pretty or not, we have yet another unanimous verdict of yes. Kinera Celest is, like I said, doing really, really well with the ladies. They like the original Wyvern, they like this one also quite a bit. In terms of compliments, we have 4-1 in favor of compliments, which is a really good score, lady number 4 being the only holdout there, doing her job as our gatekeeper. Let's go ahead and check out their thoughts. Yeah, honestly, all really good opinions here. Both colors got some love here, saying they look like jewels, really nice, feathery, really neat. Honestly, as I keep saying, Kinera Celest does a really good job with their faceplate designs, and I think that the Council ladies would agree with me. I mentioned earlier that the sort of external shell design was the biggest difference between this and the original, and that does seem to impact comfort for you, maybe in a positive way. These are still vaguely semi-custom shaped shells. You've got a tiny bit of a sort of wing there, a bit of a bulge here, a bit of an indentation here. But overall, these are a much less aggressively shaped IEM compared to the full-on semi-custom shape of the original Wyvern. For me, both of these, the original and this one, fit perfectly, no problems at all. Extremely comfortable fit. The nozzles aren't super wide. There's no real hard edges here to cause any discomfort. My wife, however, the original shape on the Wyvern is one of the few semi-custom shells that actually fit her well. She was able to form and maintain a seal, and they were very comfortable for her. These also got a full pass on the tiny ears test. She did say, however, that she did feel the sort of overall size of these a bit more in her ears compared to the original. That said, though, she was able to form and maintain a seal with these in her ears, even through excitable laughing, extreme mouth movements, and all that other stuff. So for her, these fit as comfortable as these. I know a lot of people didn't really vibe with the fit on these. I think that the change to the overall shape will make these maybe a bit more comfortable for other people. As usual, I recommend that you sort of try these out before you buy them, just because they have changed the shape. So just because these fit you, don't assume that these also will. But let's go ahead and talk about how the Wyvern Remaster sounds. The bass is boosted, but not to the point where you'll feel that it's boosted. The sub bass has some pretty good rumble, and the mid bass will punch when it's asked to, but it's not going to be that super bouncy, fun, intense bass presentation that some people are looking for. This is more controlled with good texture overall. Tiesto's Suburban Train has that classic house bass backbeat, and it feels appropriately thumpy on the remaster. They just have a nice rumble to them. The energy is good. The bass texture overall is quite nice, as I mentioned. Bass guitar and kick drums are also nice on the remaster. The iconic fast bass line and Yes's roundabout is nice and present in the mix, and it doesn't really hide behind the other instruments too much. The strings have this nice buzzy texture that I expect them to have, and the replay is overall pretty good. While it's not super boosted, and I think some folks will find the bass a little tame overall, I think it's well executed. It doesn't feel light or anemic, even if it is a little bit tamer than some of the other IEMs at this price range. Since the bass isn't overwhelmingly dominant in terms of tonality, the mids are pretty clean from a tonal perspective. There is some warmer tonality to them that comes in from that mid bass, but it's not enough to really interfere with the mid-range, at least in my experience. The lower mids don't feel thin, lean, or lacking. Their overall tonality is weighty enough to feel natural and neutral to me. Alberto Cortes's voice in his version of No Soy de Aquí, it just feels warm, lush, tonally correct. It's a very familiar replay on the Wyvern here. The strings, the bass guitar, and the horns are all well separated, and they're easily distinguished. Some of the instruments can feel a little bit further back in the mix than I'm used to, but it's nothing I don't expect from a semi-V-shaped set like this. Overall replay, though, is quite nice. Female vocals do have a bit of emphasis to them. The fundamentals are quite forward, and they tend to be spotlit a little more than on what I would say is a more neutral set. Pete Key's Kawaii Kaiwai has both ladies and their vocals sort of forward of the instrumentation. You clearly feel them rise above the thumpy bass and the electronic backing instruments to this track. As we'll see in the upper treble section, the harmonics really help these vocals feel like they're dominating this track a little bit, and the overall tonality, while it is a bit exaggerated for my taste, doesn't come off completely unnatural. It's just a very female vocal forward set. The mids overall are pretty good, just a little bit of a recession to some instruments, and that, excitable female vocal presentation. As we move into the upper mids and treble, the upper mids are definitely where I feel that the focus of this tuning is. It makes female vocals just pop forward a good bit. Their presentation is very harmonic forward, which tonally some people will appreciate. For me, it's a little bit unnatural, but it can be that sort of overly excitable thing that some people really like. Others will just think it's shouty and a little bit annoying. Tarja and her backing vocals are what I would call borderline shouty in Nightwish's Wishmaster. It's a pretty good replay, honestly, but it's also very intense with the vocal presentation overall. Specifically in the choruses, there is a little bit of slight sibilance on her S or T tones. It didn't end up bothering me all that much. It just felt like a very intense presentation of a track that already is very energetic. But this is definitely not the set for you if you're sensitive to sort of shouty tonality. Treble, on the other hand, is pretty subdued, honestly. I really got no treble fatigue from instrument harmonics. John Bonham's Pisces and Led Zeppelin's classic Stairway to Heaven had really nice wash, sustain, and energy to them. Good bit of sparkle. Nothing too ridiculous. It doesn't feel uneven. It's got enough energy, I feel, to balance out what little of a bass boost that there is. But I wouldn't say that the treble is really boosted, sort of similar to the bass. They're both just enough to make the rest of the mix feel sort of balanced out. I feel like the treble, like the bass, does what you ask it to do and not much more. This is a great presentation if you're treble sensitive, and even if some instrument harmonics were a little less energetic than I necessarily preferred, they still sounded overall fine. As far as technical performance goes, the remaster does fairly well. Bass texture, as I mentioned earlier, is good, and the driver does well at resolving those low-frequency events. That big bass drum I always talk about at the beginning of the Droid Invasion from the Phantom Menace soundtrack has good mallet detail. I can hear the difference with each strike. It doesn't feel like they're all just smearing into one another. The hits aren't super quiet either, like they can be in some sort of less bass-focused sets. I feel like the remaster, however, did struggle with some of the details in my Waltz for Debbie test. The background conversation I felt was barely audible, and while the more obvious glassware hits were present, I felt like I needed to focus more to hear some of the more subtle ones, which is not something I'm used to doing on a more resolving set. Compared to the other single DD sets at this price range, I would put the technical performance of this set around the level of the Chu 2 or the Zero 2, not quite reaching the venerable EW200 maze. Stereo separation here on the Wyvern Remaster is pretty good. The banjos, violins, and guitars that live in different ears in David Grishman's Doggy Mountain Breakdown are well separated. They don't really coalesce in the center like they can on some sets with really smeary stereo presentation, so I feel like it does pretty good here. As far as the perceived 3D soundstage, the Remaster I feel does decent. Count Basie's Tray of Hearts has a good amount of positional information relayed to you through the mix. I could easily tell where in space the bass, the guitar, the horns, and the drums all were, and while the overall depth on this track isn't incredible, this really didn't elevate it, it didn't crush it down either, and the imaging was pretty solid. I would say that this set is about average in terms of perceived 3D soundstage and stereo separation. So, the Wyvern Black Remaster, it's a pretty interesting IEM. It's a clean sound with what I would say is a borderline shouty upper mids presentation and a soft, subdued treble presentation. It's a curious case of being very aggressive with the tuning in one area while keeping the rest of the range relatively safe. There are a lot of amazing IEMs at this price range, from all-rounders to specialist sets to sort of oddball tunings. To get a better idea of how this does at standing out in what is a very crowded budget segment, I've gathered what I think are its biggest competitors, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with one of the stalwarts of the budget segment, the original 7Hz Zero, priced at $21 US. The nice, accurate, but controlled bass on the Wyvern Remaster reminded me a decent bit of the original Zero. I think in terms of overall bass presentation, they're very similar. The Zero has more forward mids. I felt that some of the instruments that were a bit pushed back here aren't here, but the Wyvern Remaster is a good bit more vocal forward, and as I mentioned, can be borderline shouty. Outside of that, however, the treble on the Zero is generally much more excitable than it is on the Wyvern Remaster. This is more a sort of bright-leaning neutral tuning compared to the sort of vocal forward neutral that the Wyvern Remaster is. Accessories on these two are essentially the same, and while I do think the Wyvern is built much better, looks much nicer, and has a better stock cable, the Zero is $10 cheaper, and at this price point, that's a big point in its favor. So, when I think vocal-focused budget IEM, I think Tangzu Wan'Er 2, priced at $23 US. The Jade model, by the way, I do have one. Review for that is coming pretty soon. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about sound. While both of these have a sort of similar treatment of female vocals, the Wan'Er 2 is more V-shaped to my ears compared to the Wyvern Remaster. It's rumblier and punchier in the bass. It also has an airier, more sparkly treble. But the biggest difference here is how these IEMs, I think, handle the upper mids. The Wyvern Black presents harmonics in a much more energetic way compared to the Wan'Er 2, at least to my ears. If you're a fan of that harmonic forward approach to female vocals, then this, combined with a leaner bass, will make the Remaster even more vocal focused than the Wan'Er 2. If, however, you're sensitive to shouty tonality, then the more balanced Wan'Er 2, I think, will still be the female vocalist IEM that you should look into. Different ways of approaching a vocal focus set, I think both are very valid. Alright, this is the big one. The original Wyvern Black, or Wyvern Abyss as I call it, still available new and priced at $30 US. Here's where we will see the tuning changes that Kinera has done. And listening to these A/B, I found that the Remaster is the more neutral sounding of the two, with a cleaner, less impactful bass presentation and a more restrained treble. Honestly, if you want the excitable, dynamic sounding, more V-shaped set, there's nothing wrong with the original Wyvern Black. I still think it sounds fantastic. If, however, you thought that this was just a bit too smeary, a bit too bloated, and you want a cleaner, more controlled sounding IEM with less airiness and a little bit more upper mids energy, then the Remaster might be on your list instead. Both of these are vocal forward. This one has that extra zing with the harmonics, so keep that in mind. What I will say is if you have the original Wyvern Abyss, I don't really think there's a need to upgrade to this one unless you want a side grade that will give you a different presentation that you'll get with less bass and less treble. Similarly, if you have this one and you're thinking about what the original is like, again, I wouldn't necessarily go ahead and do that unless you're looking for a side grade with a different tonality. These two, honestly, are very different products, and I think that Kinera Celest should keep them both on sale just because they both offer different values at around this price point. Now, in the Wyvern Abyss review, I brought in the EW200 as a sort of $40 stalwart for that tonality, but this is much more neutral, much more vocal focused, so instead of the EW200, we're bringing in the $40 Moondrop LAN. One of the more underrated picks at this price point, in my opinion. The LAN, again, has a very similar overall bass profile to the Wyvern Remastered here. It doesn't rumble as much in the sub bass, but it does have that more present mid-range like the Zero, and it has a more detailed, controlled treble presentation that it just has more energy and more sparkle to it. And it does that while maintaining the female vocal forward presentation without straying into the sort of shouty territory. If you're sensitive to upper treble, then the more subdued treble on the remaster might be more to your tastes. But again, this assumes that you're okay with the upper mids being as energetic as they are here. Remaster is more forward with female vocals, and the extra rumble in the sub bass can help it be the more exciting listen here. But personally speaking, I overall found myself preferring the LAN in terms of sound. It is, however, an extra $10, which again, at this price point, is quite important. Wrapping things up then, the original Wyvern Black was a lot more like the Wan'Er 2, a warm-leaning vocal focus set with enough energy in the treble that it didn't come across as dark or overly warm and was balanced rather overall. The remaster, however, has opted for a tuning more in line with the 7Hz Zero and the Moondrop LAN. It doesn't have the treble presence, energy, or detail retrieval that the LAN or the Zero have, but it offers more forward vocals, and for the treble sensitive among you, a more controlled, subdued treble while still maintaining decent detail. It does have, however, quite a bit of energy in those the upper mids, and while it didn't really bother me, I know some of y'all might have issues with it. If that's the case, I would say either save $10 and grab the Zero, or spend the extra 10 and grab the LAN. Alright, so let's go ahead and pull up the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale and see where we can put the Kinera Celest Wyvern Black Remastered. Personally speaking, I don't find the remaster a straight upgrade over the original. The tonality is different enough that I think the sets are targeting different people. The original was more of a sort of vocal-focused V-shaped tuning, along the lines of the EW200, the Wan'Er. The remaster is a more neutral female-focused set looking to take buyers away from the Zero and the LAN. Does it succeed? It does if you can handle the upper mids here. For me, they weren't an issue. It was just a very excitable presentation, but I'm sure that the less shout-tolerant among you will have some issues with this. This isn't the most detailed or technical set in the world, and while the bass has decent texture, this is a bit on the lighter side for, I feel, some of the more bass-loving folks. Overall, I don't think this represents as much of an all-rounder tuning as its predecessor did, and while I definitely think there will be folks who will appreciate this very upper mid-centric female vocal focused tune, I think that there are options both just above and just below the price range that offer a more balanced, less intense tuning with more detail. It isn't bad though. I had fun listening to it. Some of my female vocalists sounded really intense through this. It was a lot of fun. It's not bad. I think if you like its handling of female vocals, you'll really like this. I think it's fairly unique in the price range. It's a good fit then for the but I like this tier. While it is pretty nice in terms of overall sound and value, the potential trouble spot in that sort of upper mids area and the fierce competition both above and below its price range make it a bit more difficult to recommend any stronger than this, but I don't think it's as tonally flawed as you might think. So, who would I recommend this for then? Well, right off the bat, this isn't for you if you're sensitive to shouty tonality in female vocals. This will most likely trigger that sensitivity from you, and you're not going to want to listen to this for very long, or you're going to be reaching to the volume and turning it down. This also isn't for bass or treble heads, as both ends of the spectrum are more subdued and controlled than they might tend to prefer. If, however, you have a library full of female vocals and you like that sort of harmonic forward, overemphasized, unnatural but in an exciting way sort of tonality, I think that this, with its rather unique handling of female vocals, is a good specialist set for you to reach to. And I think that specialist sets at sort of the budget realm is a very good thing. I think it's very reasonable to pick up several sets that have varying different tonalities on a budget and sort of have a sampling of things to listen to. I also think this is a good set if you're sensitive to upper treble energy or are treble sensitive in general, and you still want something that's vocal forward, because something with more controlled bass. This is a very safe set in that regard. It doesn't husk up female vocals. It doesn't nasal them too much either, but the treble is very safe and the bass is very controlled. It is specialized in that way. Yeah, I think it's a good set. I think it's just not going to have as wide an audience as the original Wyvern Abyss did. But that's going to do it for today. The Wyvern Remaster, an interesting retune to be sure. While I personally find myself preferring the original Wyvern Abyss, I can see how this more harmonic forward female vocal presentation will win over certain listeners. And it's always nice to have products that address certain niches. The next Thrifty Tunes will be on the Ear Acoustics STA-K, and that's actually going to be a double feature with its bigger sister, the STA Pro Max. So it's not 100% of Thrifty Tunes, but it will be, trust me. Stay tuned for that one. But for now, I really hope you enjoyed the review. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.